Ileadura Timi. Welcome to my sanctuary. Welcome to my prayer room. I am Olori Lolade Skintili Monies, the founding monk at Soul Medicine Sanctuary, the soft landing place for those in search of total liberation from within. This space is for those of you who know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are responsible for getting us into the new world. And also for those of you who are eager to learn about Afrofuturism, Black Sacred Futurity, if you are interested in collective breath work, rest, prayer, intention, manifestation, collective timeline jumping into the new liberated reality so we can exit this terrifying crap show that the empire is playing. That's who this space is for. So let's just take a few deep breaths. I'm going to try not to aggravate the microphone. Got the sound bowls playing. I'm going to turn that up and we're just going to take a few deep breaths together. Okay, let's do that. Deep inhale through your nose, slow exhale through your mouth. Go ahead. Just breathe. If you need to like wiggle a little bit, shake it up, please let me know how my sound is. This is my first time using this mic, so if you can't hear me, if you hear interference, please let me know. Do not be shy. Okay. Okay. So yeah, you can do a little neck roll, a little bit of shoulder work. I might have to put it on the outside. I just didn't want the blinking lights all up in y'all's face, but because I'm going to be moving a lot, I think I have to put it on the outside. Okay. So roll your shoulders, roll your neck. You can put your hands in front of you, straight ahead, and just straighten your arms, twist them around a little bit. You can kind of twist your hands like this, right? Welcome, welcome. It's good to see y'all here, right? Just straighten your hands flat back and drop them, right? All this stuff to just let's loosen up. Okay, so we're talking about Black Sacred Futurity. Um, the last session, I named it "You're Not Who You Think You Are. You're Who You Know You Are," right? And because we were in a bit of a hurry, I didn't get to fully land the argument. So I want to make sure to really, uh, explicate everything that was brought up in that last session. And then, yeah, and if you are a futurist, if you're curious about Afrofuturism or futurism in general, I would love to hear from you. If, again, you are thinking any of these thoughts, you have questions, you have feedback, you have suggestions of things I need to look deeper into, what am I missing? Please don't hesitate to let me know your thoughts in the comments, okay? So we're going to take a lot of breath breaks in the course of this conversation just to kind of recenter ourselves as many times as it takes. And we're going to just tap in to the divine message. But you're not who you think you are, you're who you know you are. So ultimately, the goal of this message and my collective messaging, especially over the last several weeks, is to help us tap into our original identity, our divine identity, right? The goal is to help us move into a liberated future with our souls intact. Black people have done a lot to survive empire. We've done a lot to survive the harm that's been meted out on us. And in a lot of cases, that meant suppressing our souls, putting them in the back on the back burner, and leading with our adapted identity, right? The identity that made us legible in the classroom as school children, the identity that made us legible in our family, especially if you were an empath or a firstborn or you were created and your family didn't get it, especially if you're Nigerian, right? Um, the identities that made us legible in the workplace, right? In the corporate environment, so on and so forth. The identity that you had to create in order to be able to survive, society, right, as we know it. So, this conversation is about helping us tap into the soul identity, right? That deepest identity that God gave us, the Creator gave us, the identity we've always had since the beginning of time, right? But that we have, most of us have gotten away from. And we're going to tie that to what liberation means, what liberation looks like: sustained liberation, permanent liberation, not the type of liberation that every generation has to fight for again and again. Because, again, if you've been paying attention to the news, you probably heard about the flyover in Florida. I think it was yesterday or the day before. Terrifying, terrifying. And I'll tell you why it should be terrifying for most anybody who is awake and paying attention. Not only did the flyover happen where these military planes flew super close to civilians on the beach with their families, with their children, the Secretary of War stated that there would be more of those until morale was improved, that there would be no repercussions, no reprimands for those who flew over the beach. I want you to think about that for a minute. Welcome, welcome to the family. Welcome, welcome. It's good to have you guys here. I want you to think about that for a moment. The fact that, I mean, if you've been paying attention, you already know that the US military has declared war on its citizens since the ICE raids began, right? But this is quite a severe escalation, because this is putting people in danger, in direct danger, loads of people, and doing it with complete disregard and with complete lack of remorse, right? With a promise to do more of it. If you've paid attention to what the US military has done in partnership with the occupying military, the military occupying Palestine, if you've paid attention to what they've done over there, if you've paid attention to what they're doing in Iran, if you've paid attention to what they've been doing around the world for the last 250 years, then you know that this is a military that is out for blood. And when we pay attention to the tech bros and the AI that's being used to facilitate murder and mass murder and warfare, then we should know, especially considering how they've been treating Americans, we should know that that same behavior that has been um, exemplified throughout the world can come to the states, right? And so this flyover this past week, or this week, was an example, was a warning, was a reminder that, hey, we're bringing it to y'all too. So when I talk about Black Sacred Futurity, when I talk about liberation from within, it's not just for, for navel gazing, for academic purposes. This is about true liberatory work. This is about how can we inhabit a reality? How can we enter a reality in which we are totally free? And when I say liberation from within, that is, again, to mean that our souls are intact, our souls are free. It's not to mean that we're moving into the future with these adapted identities, because that's not freedom, right? Having to pretend to be somebody that you're not, having to uh, put on a cloak, put on a mask just to survive. That is not liberation. That's not freedom. That is survival, but it's not liberation. And so the goal of this space and all of my work is true liberation, total liberation from within, which means that we get to know who we truly are. We're going to be talking about self-recognition over self-love, right? The goal is that you get to know who you truly are, you get to embrace who you truly are, and that is your soul identity, that you get to embody that identity, and that identity, your soul identity, your core self, that is who people meet when they meet you. That is who you carry out into the world. That is even who you carry as you make a living, right? Most of us, brown people, black and brown people, indigenous people of the planet, have been colonized, whether by force militarily or culturally. Our imaginations have been colonized. Our hopes and dreams have been colonized. Our bodies have been colonized. The food that we eat, the air that we breathe, what we can hope for has all been colonized, right? And so, because I have a daughter, because God called me to this work by force, every time I try to escape it or try to think I'm supposed to do something else with my life, Spirit be like, sorry, no, this is it. This is all you're going to do. So, because of that, I am here to share what is being given to me, what is being shown to me, the insights that I have felt in my heart over, you know, more recent times, but I have been doing this work and sharing my insights for a long time. So all of that is being synthesized now into what I am calling this framework, this Black Sacred Futurity framework, right? Shout out to the Black Speculative Arts movement, where a lot of this became coherent for me, allowing me to couch my learnings and my teachings in the work of Afrofuturism. I am also shifting the work, engaging with the question of Afro nowism, right? How do we shift from liberation in the future to liberation in the present? How do we embody liberation in our physical reality, in our hearts, in our minds, in our cells, in our electricity of our body? How do we embody liberation now in the present so that it ceases to be something that we are aspiring to and it becomes something that we are embodying? And ultimately, the bottom line is that when enough of us, when the critical mass of us, those of us who are ready for the new world, when we embody this liberated reality, we feel it consistently in ourselves, in our hearts, in our minds, then it becomes the reality that we inhabit, that we experience, right? And so that's why we are doing this work. So you're not who you think you are, you're who you know you are. I want to just speak a bit to the spiritual and the academic, right? The intersection between the spiritual and the academic. So if you've been on this page for a while, then you probably know that I got a master's in African studies at Yale. I was working on Nigerian immigrant identity. I'm a Nigerian immigrant to the US. My whole family immigrated and I have siblings that were born here. I was very interested in how that experience impacts the identity that Nigerians embody, right? And I looked primarily at first generation Nigerian Americans, just like that whole scale of, 0.25 generation to the second generation, et cetera, of Nigerians in the new country. Um, and then at Cambridge, University of Cambridge, I was a Gates Scholar in the sociology PhD program. And there, my initial focus was to be on Nigerian immigrant identity, like the comparative or comparative study between Nigerians in the US and Nigerians in the UK. Ultimately, when the pandemic happened or the plandemic happened, my focus shifted to world making through cultural production, right? World making through cultural production at the time meant analyzing how artists, Black artists, African artists, transnational, those who had a foot in Africa and a foot in the diaspora, as well as those who were African adjacent in the Black diaspora, how their work, how their uh, creative practices, etc., their cultural productions were creating cultural and economic networks that were shifting the global economic order, right? I think about Beyonce's Black is King, Kehinde Wiley's Obama portrait, and so many other projects. Y'all know about Burna Boy now. You know about Wizkid. You know about Thames, right? Everybody has their favorite Nigerian artist. We're talking about Tyler. All of these artists are where they're at now. We have access to them because of work that was done as early as like the early 2000s and mid 2000s, when the first African artists started to put their music on YouTube, on the internet, right? And when I say first, I mean the first digital, right? Before that, we had so many, obviously there's infinite history of African music and Nigerian music, Yoruba music. But and let me shout out King Sunny Ade and Fela Kuti and all the pioneers, the Lijadu sisters, right? But those are the pioneers. But in the digital era, the younger folk started to make their own sort of hip hop, Afro pop infused, what we call Bidu, right? All this music that was infused with their cultural knowledge, their cultural exposure from, again, Black American music, African music, right? And so I was very interested in how these cultural productions made it possible for whole new economies to emerge, right? Because these artists were putting their music on YouTube, it became possible for concerts, right? It became possible for people to fly them into the US or the UK or et cetera for concerts. It became possible for Nigerian bars to open up. I remember going to Ife Lounge in Brooklyn on Nostrand Avenue, right? Because there was now a market, there was an audience that was yearning for this music and to socialize around this music more and more, especially a young audience, right? So I could go on, but my research was interested in how that cultural production was shifting reality, was shifting our world. And so now we are in a world where you have an Ibrahim Traore, right? Where you have Botswana, you have so many, a growing number of leaders. Let me not give too much credit, right? We have a growing number of African leaders who are moving closer to the Pan African playbook in spirit and in truth, not just in word. I mean, I know that there's people who are kind of cosplaying Pan Africanism, but I want to celebrate those who are serious Pan Africans. But beyond the government leaders, I'm more interested in the youth and how their awakenings are pushing for better African leadership. Their awakenings are pushing for more African sovereignty, right? You have the AU that's far more invested in African sovereignty and far more vocal about it than they were a decade ago, 2 decades ago, right? So this era that we're in now, where we see such greater African sovereignty and African boldness, this is a result. This is, the cultural productions were a major force in making this happen because they have awakened not just the African diaspora and African youth. They've created these networks where more information could be passed across. Um, so they've enlightened African youth, but also they have changed the understanding of Africa for even Black America, right? For a growing proportion of Black America. And so these questions for me were critical when it comes to understanding how we get free, right? How we shake off the shackles of oppression, how we eliminate the overbearing power of the empire on our lands, how we address the extraction of our resources, human and otherwise, right? It is through the art, it is through the storytelling, it is through the music, it is through the visuals, it is through every form of cultural production. Technology is a form of cultural production, right? It is through all of these forms of cultural production that we have completely transformed the position of Africa in the world. And it is through continued development of African cultural production and Black diaspora cultural production that we will continue to elevate the position and the power of not only Africa, but the global Black indigenous population. If you follow me on threads, I've been talking about how I don't want to ever hear you refer to yourself as a minority. If you are a Black person, if you are an African person, don't you ever call yourself a minority, because you are the indigenous people of the planet. We are the indigenous people of the planet. They can never outnumber you, no matter how they try. Remember, every other race is struggling to reproduce. They can keep talking about population control when it comes to us. What does that mean? To limit the number of African birds and Black birds. Wakanda forever, baby, yes. Right? They want to limit our population because we multiply so fast, they can't keep up. So don't ever let them tell you that you're a minority. Don't get me started. So I'm saying all this to sort of establish my practice as I call myself a shaman, a techie shaman, going from academia, going from Yale to Cambridge into the soul medicine sanctuary, right? Which can only be described as a walk with God, as an intimate walk with the divine, as a deep listening, a deep attentiveness to the divine, the allowing for God to speak to me in all the ways that God can speak to me, all the ways that I could receive. And so when I say to you that your soul knows who you are, we're going to be talking about somatic knowledge, somatic intelligence, because there is the knowing that you read in the books, right? There's a knowing that you know in your brain, but there is none of that compares to the knowing that is in your cells, the knowing that is in your body, the knowing that comes from your soul. Your soul is who you've always been eternally, right? You are not what do they say? You're not a body, you are a soul having a human experience. You are a soul, you have a body. So the more in touch we are able to be with our soul identity, especially through a spirituality that liberates us, a spirituality that doesn't condemn us to hell, a spirituality that allows us to feel the presence of the divine in our beings, in our bodies, to look at ourselves and see God and see the divine and know that we are divine. That type of spirituality is what allows us to access our souls and to embody our soul, to lead from the soul, right? So my walk has been very, very unconventional, right? It's been it's been very traumatic at times, right? But I know that the God that I serve, it is real. I know that the messages that I receive are truly transformative for me. I mean, I have been on a healing journey. It's been up and down and topsy turvy, but I have come to a place of self recognition, a form of self recognition I could not have 10 years ago. I could not have 5 years ago. I couldn't even understand what self recognition was. And that's what we're aiming to get to as Black people, as liberated people, as Global South people, right? We want, hi Derek, hi Treva, hi Yuma, hi SHXDY, I don't know how to say it, hi Awal, shout out to y'all, thank you so much for being here. So what was I saying? We have to know our soul identity, because that is what liberates us. That is what makes it possible for us to move as beings who know our worth, who know our value. I was talking about self recognition, right? So, you recognizing who God made you and seeing that in yourself, it's hard to explain until you feel it, until you know, and until you realize that, bruh, there is nothing more valuable. There is no external validation, no external approval, no empire or imperial approval that is more valuable to me than my own approval, than my own intimacy with my core self. Right? That is what we're talking about. When we're talking about self-recognition, is your ability to be at peace in yourself, with yourself, and embracing who you deeply are. And it's not just about how you look or how you sound or any of these sort of like semi, vain things. It's about knowing your heart, knowing who you are in your heart, in your soul, recognizing that, recognizing who you're meant to be on this earth, right? Recognizing the persona that God gave you to carry, and being so at peace with, and so like adoring that, like embracing that, celebrating that. This is what self recognition is about. So this is what we're aiming to get. So the methodology of intuiting knowledge, right? I talked about somatic intelligence. This is just like you feeling something in your body, when you have a gut feeling, when your heart flutters, right? These are forms of somatic intelligence, right? The awareness that your shoulders are tight because you're stressed, right? That's a form of somatic intelligence. Us being able to recognize the soul speaking to us through the body. Very important. The soul speaks to you through the body. More time. So when we talk about a gut feeling, butterflies in the stomach, feeling weak in the knees, right? These are all forms of somatic intelligence, somatic knowledge, where our body is telling us something at the soul level, something that is happening at the emotional, at the spiritual, at the soul level. So historically, all these universities that we have been looking at as like the standard, as the top tier of knowledge, they emerged from contemplative practices, right? They emerged from societies or, priesthoods or monasteries, right? Groups of people who were seeking the truth of the divine, people seeking to understand, why did God make us humans? What are we here for? What does God intend? What is the purpose of creation, right? The people whose hearts were hungry for this knowledge, who went into the desert. Y'all know about the desert fathers, right? The Sunni mystics, which I'm mixing up the Muslim. There's a Muslim group that tends to be more mystic, and I usually know their names, but I'm blanking right now. But in every religion, you have groups of people who are focused on the contemplative, who meditate, who go by the water, right? Who sit in the sun, whatever it is that helps them to hear the divine. That is their vocation, right? They make that their vocation. You have the Buddhist monks in meditation, right? You have all these different forms of people who seek truth from God, from the divine, from the entirety, the infinity. And from that seeking, they come to an understanding, they come to a knowledge, they come to an awareness, right? They come to a confirmation. They have a feeling in their gut, in their body, in their heart, something new, something true, something concrete that they didn't know before. And the contemplative, the spiritual practice, the spiritual research, we can call it, right? The spiritual intelligence, it can be just as rigorous sometimes as academic intelligence. When you're in the contemplative practice, oftentimes you are checking yourself with other contemplative folks. You're checking yourself with other meditative folks. You're asking if other people are receiving the messages that you are receiving. You're seeking confirmation. You're even checking in the literature. You're checking in history. You're looking to see who else has said this. How does this sort of interact with the knowledge that is already out there? How true is this? Can I prove this? Right? This is what it means to have a contemplative practice and access divine knowledge, divine intelligence through that contemplative practice. And when people do this over and over for hundreds of years, thousands of years, we're constantly creating more and better knowledge, right? We're constantly evolving in our intelligence and in our understanding as human beings. And sometimes we're just starting over because some evil people are trying to destroy the planet and wipe everybody off the planet, and then everything has to start over, right? Or some people made mistakes according to the lore of Atlantis, right? And so then humans just keep starting over. So my calling, as I know many of us out there are being called to, is to elevate the planet, is to embody truth, is to embrace truth, is to sit within truth, is to seek truth. And just in that practice of embracing truth, of sitting in truth, of feeling truth, of sensing truth, we get to elevate our vibration. We get to elevate our consciousness. We get to radiate that wisdom, that light, that purity, that holiness to those around us, right? And as we do so, we are naturally elevating the planet. We're elevating the consciousness of the planet, of our generation, right? And so I came up in the Christian faith. I've talked about that a lot. And I have a deep, I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. I have a personal relationship with the Holy Spirit. Nothing can take that away from me. I will always have my relationship with the Holy Spirit. At the same time, I recognize that the way that the evangelical church has been trying to browbeat us into following their false doctrine, their Christless doctrine. Again, Luke 4:18, right? They don't preach Luke 4:18. They don't preach liberating the poor. They don't preach liberating the oppressed. They don't preach freeing the captives. They don't preach letting out the prisoners. They don't preach the year of Jubilee and giving people back their land and freeing slaves. They preach empire, right? And so the way that that group of Christians and the Christians or the so-called Christians who have used empire to harm people, who have cloaked empire in Bible verses, they've confused a lot of us as to who Christ was and what Christianity is really meant to be, right? But ultimately, who Christ is and what Christ teaches, so many other mystics have taught throughout history. And the idea that we're going to condemn other people because they don't follow Christ, that to me, that is just so not Christ-like. There's even a scripture, Paul said it, I believe in Galatians. I used to know this particular location, where he talks about those who are of Christ because their behavior is Christ-like. Even if they've never met Christ, they've never talked to Christ, their behavior is Christ-like, their faith is Christ-like, the way that they treat other people, right? So many people, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, anything that you believe in, the only gospel that so many people will ever encounter is your treatment of them. Do you treat them like Christ would? Because if you don't do that, don't preach nothing to me, okay? Don't preach nothing to me. Do you treat people like Muhammad would? Because if not, don't preach nothing to me, okay? All right. So we take that spiritual intelligence, that divine intelligence, that cosmic intelligence that we feel in our bodies, that we feel in our souls, that activates that the somatic experience that the divine activates in our beings, and we know it and we confirm it with other people, and then we write it down. We make art, we tell stories, we make technology, right? That reflects that intuition, that insight, that vision that the divine has given us. We concretize that knowledge through something tangible. We share it with others, right? We heal others through that insight and that information, that divine intelligence, right? That is our responsibility. And so through that, in so doing, we further the wisdoms, right? We further global wisdom in terms of who we are as humans, what our responsibility is, and how we are meant to coexist on this planet and survive on this planet, right? All right. So we've been talking about liberation from within. We've been talking about rebuilding the Black self after empire, right? We've been talking about identity as the antidote for cultural psychosis. I'm going to see if I can find you my definition of cultural psychosis, but ultimately, cultural psychosis is it describes the condition in which a people become alienated from their own reality, right? I started off talking about Nigerian cultural psychosis. It's not a real diagnosis, right? This is a metaphor to talk about how oppressed people, the reality that we have inherited, what we think is real is not real, right? What we have adopted is the lie of the empire, the lie that the empire, that the dominant force has given us, has told us about who we are, what is important, like what we should care about, right? So our cultural psychosis shows up in us thinking that their languages are more important than ours, that their knowledge is more important than ours, that what it means to be civilized is to act British or act American, right? That these are forms of cultural psychosis. In the original video, I talked about how we don't recognize the urgency of taking care of each other. We'd rather dress it up, build fancy buildings, wear fancy clothes. I talk about Nigerian exceptionalism, a lot of my writing, right? We focus on the exceptional, right? Let's get fancy degrees, let's get fancy awards, let's make a lot of money. We don't deal with the real core issues of the soul, of the heart. We have all these folks getting all these fancy degrees and fancy awards, but in their family, in their home, I'm not perfect. I'm gonna speak for myself too, right? In our families, in our homes, we have so much harm happening, emotional harm, psychological harm, spiritual harm happening in our very homes. But then we go out and we celebrate, we talk about our awards and our accolades. It makes no sense. It's a form of madness, right? And because it is because of um, the imperial sort of colonization of our minds, of our hearts, of our bodies, of our souls, it is because of this way that empire has inhabited our being that we have come to think that these other things are important, right? Because we're basically trying to impress the agents of empire as opposed to taking care of what's real and true, which is yourself, your family, right? What is in front of you. Empire is what brought religion in the form that tells us that we have to condemn other people and fight other people. You have all this religious infighting all across Africa, right? And I refer to the empire as the virus. They come and they find a way to divide and conquer by any means necessary. And religion is one of the most prominent ways, obviously, that they have done that, right? So have us, even within the same family, a father cursing their child to hell, a mother cursing their child to hell, as opposed to really trying to get to the soul of your child, trying to get to the soul of your neighbor, trying to get to the soul of your relative. Who are you? What do you need? How can I support you? How can we collectively move into a better liberated future, a better liberated timeline? How can I be responsible for your well-being? How can I be better for you? How can you make me better? How can I make you better? Ubuntu. I am because you are. I am because we are. I cannot exist without you. You cannot exist without me. We are one collectively in humanity. And so when we're able to operate from that understanding that my liberation depends on your liberation, then we can make each other free. But if we see each other as enemies, none of us will be free, right? And so I can get into a little bit more technical details about, like, there are some people who won't subscribe to this, right? And you can't liberate everybody, but those who do desire to inhabit a liberated timeline, a liberated reality, we have to be in agreement that we are one, that we need each other, right? Ubuntu, I am because you are. All right. So instead of cultural psychosis, right? Instead of seeing ourselves through the lens of empire, instead of hating ourselves, instead of hating our skin, hating our hair, hating our lips, hating our language, hating our bodies, subconsciously or consciously, right? We come back into a knowledge of identity. We come back into appreciation for who God made us. Just the fact that God chose to put me in a glorious Black body. God chose to give me the most beautiful language on the planet, Yoruba. The fact that God chose to make me part of the most wonderful people. I am grateful. I celebrate. That is my identity, right? And that is the inherited identity. We cannot be mad at ourselves or at our God for who they made us. We must celebrate, embrace that, because only from there can we begin to embrace ourselves. Only from there can we begin to see God in ourselves. If you think that your culture is backwards, if you think that your language is stupid, how can you possibly see value in yourself at the soul level, at the core level? You will forever pursue the identity that is outside of you. You will forever pursue the approval of your oppressor, right? And so when you have a solid identity, solid clarity of who you are, who God made you, and the blessing and the benefit of that, then it becomes far easier to completely break the shackles of cultural psychosis, to break the shackles of imperial mental domination, and to embrace the beautiful soul that God gave you, and embrace who you are, right? And so as we begin to navigate from the adapted identity I mentioned earlier, the adapted identity, the masks that we put on in order to be able to, navigate this imperial world. When we move from that to the recognition and the appreciation of the inherited identity, the language, the nationality, the ethnicity, the physical traits, right? When we move to that, it becomes much easier to get to the soul identity, the soul self. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot in this continued series on Black Sacred Futurity and rebuilding the Black self after empire, right? I will explain a bit about Black Sacred Futurity. I don't know if it's here in the timeline or a bit later, but because I mentioned it, I'll just mention, I'll just recap again that from this journey of academia into this sort of shamanic role, I have had to language, analyze, like articulate my offering. I've had to analyze and articulate what God has given me in a way that could be legible to the academic as well as to the layperson, right? The artist, the creator, right? And I'm doing this for my own benefit, just to like synthesize my thoughts. I'm doing it for my daughter's benefit because I know that she is my favorite student, right? She picks up everything that I put down and she gives me back, strong feedback, and she teaches me things, right? Doing it for her and for her generation. And then I'm doing it so that it can be useful. It can be, these tools can be applied for our liberation, for whether people are whatever walk of life you're in, right? These are tangible tools, right? So we're going to be breaking down the tools over time, and I've shared some of them with you. I've done some meditations with y'all that are really powerful. If you go back and look at some of my lives and some of the shorts, we're going to be practicing much more of this. The goal is to get to spiritual militancy, right? But Black Sacred Futurity basically is a container within which we can integrate the spiritual, the metaphysical, the technical, right? The political. We have to recognize that, in order to liberate our people, we have to liberate our souls. We have to liberate our bodies or liberate our beings. So individually, we have to be free. We have to feel free. Individually, we have to feel sovereign. Individually, we have to feel worthy of sovereignty. We have to recognize that you are a human being, a soul with a light in you that God put in you. You have to recognize the importance and the value of that and be able to move in the world as though you deserve to be here. Be able to move in the world as though nobody should be able to extract the value from the lands that you came from, right? Be able to move in the world with the respect for yourself, that nobody should be able to kill people just because they look like you, right? So these are the elements of Black Sacred Futurity. It's like taking our ability from the soul level, our ability to embrace who we are, right, as cosmic beings and as, Black, African, global South people, indigenous people of the planet, to the political power, right, that it takes to preserve us into the future, to protect us. I'm so sorry I can't read all your comments because I will, I will completely lose my train of thought, but I'm gonna shout you all out very soon. Thank you so much for the live. Thank you so much for the comments. I appreciate y'all so much. Big kisses to y'all. And I love all your long, loving comments, Derek. I appreciate you. Right. But ultimately, we cannot just navel gaze. We can't just talk, right? We have to liberate ourselves. And when I talk about liberation, the goal is ultimately security, right? What's harming Black people, what's making us, we've talked about Nolan on the last live, and we will continue to talk about Nolan. There's a lot of controversy around that, which we'll get into, probably in the future days. But security, how do we keep ourselves safe? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you keep your family safe? How do you keep your neighborhood safe? If you're from the African continent or a global South country, how do you keep your country safe? How do you keep people who look like you or who speak your language safe when moving around the world? How do we reclaim the respect that we are due with our passports when moving around the world? How do we ensure that when somebody harms a Black person anywhere in the world, the retribution that comes on them will keep them from ever trying it again? The answer, as I've been given, as I've learned from so many scholars that came before me, and activists and teachers and prophets that came before me, the solution is to heal our inner world so that our outer world can reflect that. Let me say that again. We have to heal our inner world so that our outer world can reflect who we desire to be, who we want to be, who we need to become, right? When our inner world, our inner architecture is renewed and refined and upgraded, then our families reflect that, right? Our relationships reflect that. Our communities reflect that liberated inner architecture, right? And then our institutions reflect that. Our community centers, our arts councils, our bookstores, our restaurants, our schools, our universities, our churches, our mosques, our temples of any kind, they begin to reflect that liberated inner architecture in the way that we treat ourselves, in the way that we treat our neighbors, in the way that we preserve our institutions and secure our institutions and our communities. So this for me is institution building work. Right? Malcolm X taught us we got to build institutions. Marcus Garvey taught us we got to build institutions. Thomas Sankara taught us we got to build and secure our institutions. So I'm talking about institution building from the inside out. Okay. So we talked a bit about the double consciousness, the triple consciousness. I won't go too much into that because I feel like I've talked about that a lot. So the boys talked about double consciousness in the Black American experience. Fanon talked about the double consciousness in the African colonial experience. I wrote a paper on the triple consciousness when I was at Yale, thinking about Nigerian immigrant identity and the Nigerian having to interact or interface with the Black American, the white American, and the Nigerian, right? And how that created or produced a triple consciousness. Whereas, even with all of those forms of split consciousness, we're not even getting to the soul, right? Even the Black American who is interacting with the white American, let me turn the fan off. Even the Black American who is interacting with the white American, we're not even talking about their soul. We're just talking about the identity that they're allowed to, inhabit an empire, right? Even the African colonial subject who is interfacing with the white, colonial master or the colonial agent. We're still not talking about the soul for that person, right? We're talking about them inhabiting an identity that they have been allowed to maintain, right, to survive in their, even in the indigenous context, right? So it's almost like the exception not the rule, to be able to be who you truly are, right? And so, with me, with triple consciousness, Nigerian immigrant identity, same thing. We're not talking about the soul. So, what I've been talking about on these sanctuary sessions, is the infinite split, right? Because even from triple consciousness, double, triple, etc., when it comes down to it, in this modern world, we are interfacing with a lot of different people who have different perceptions of us. And as Black people, especially, we are dealing with uh, predominantly negative perceptions of us, right? Because the messages, the images, the stories that are being told about us, the policies that have been being written about us, they are predominantly negative. They're predominantly harmful towards us. You understand? So we are having to see ourselves through an increasing number of eyes, an increasing number of lenses. And none of that really serves us tapping into who we are at the soul level and maintaining that embodiment and that wisdom of self recognition and that peace and the alignment that comes from self recognition. Okay. All right. So then we get to the soul identity. And so I named this Your Soul Knows Who You Are, right? And we might do a little bit of breath work to just tap into that wisdom. But I've been saying this already here, is that when we come to the deepest part of ourselves, when we rest in the awareness of the deepest part of ourselves, we get access to our soul identity, our soul knowledge. And this is where we can ask the divine, we can ask our deepest self questions for clarity about who we are, who we're meant to be, what our responsibility is. This is where we can experience that divine intelligence that awakens us to a deeper knowledge of self, right? And so the goal is to enter that awareness, enter that wisdom, and live from it, right? To receive the wisdom and the insight and the truth from that place that helps us to live as more liberated beings, that helps us to live as more divine beings, right? Because liberation is a God thing. So when we're able to live as divine beings, we are much more able to recognize our worthiness to be free, our worthiness to not tolerate a single moment of oppression from anybody. I talked about Nolan on the last session, and I've been talking about him a lot. And the key thing that I want to just say here is, when Nolan was killed, there was a whole big conversation about his. I'm saying he was killed. I'm not playing around with these people in their lives. Okay, it's obvious that he was sacrificed. So I can't prove it, and I don't need to prove it, but it's quite obvious that he was sacrificed. For whom? Why? The conspiracy people will deal with that, right? But what happened when he was killed was that there was a lot of conversation about his identity, right? Was he the type of Black person who only hung out with white people? Why was he only with white people? His parents must have failed him, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, when you look at the images of him as the all-American boy, the football player, there's nothing. He's not the kind of kid that they could put up any hoodie pictures of or try to make him look like a criminal, right? And so the bottom line is that our respectability politics, right? That taking on the identity that the oppressor wants us to have in the double consciousness, it doesn't save us. It doesn't protect us from harm consistently, right? Um, and even the idea of us coming against each other and saying, "Oh, you're not Black enough because you were hanging out with all white people," it's harmful, right? And so that's even within us. There's still within our communities. There's still that sort of split consciousness, right? We're still not fully recognizing the soul of the person. And so with Nolan, it's a reminder that our security is the essential solution, right? And us being able to, I keep talking about the soul, but being able to activate our power, right? Because again, if you believe in God, if you believe in the divine, you believe in the infinite, then you know that your power comes from your soul, right? That your soul has always existed, and that your soul is the part of you that is God, that is always connected to God. And so you know that if God has power, you have power, and the more tapped into your soul you are, the more power you're able to radiate, right, and wield, and the more you're able to manifest from that place. So when we're talking about security, we're talking about the ability to, one, build trust and intimacy amongst us, right? Because if I'm not in touch with my soul identity, I'm not in touch with my own self, I'm not intimate with myself, how can I be intimate with the next person emotionally, right? How can I feel safe with you? I don't feel safe with myself. So when we get to that soul level, we're able to be connected to ourselves, intimate spiritually with ourselves, which allows us to then be spiritually intimate, emotionally intimate with the next person, right? And so that is where trust comes from. See, that virus is so adamant about destroying trust between Black and Brown people, even within Yoruba family, within the Nigerian family, within, within the Nigerian country, right? The primary goal of the virus, of the imperial virus, is to sow distrust and discord and enmity among the people of the global south. But when we can tap into our soul identity, then I can see the soul in you. Namaste, right? If I can see my soul, I can connect with my soul. I can see your soul. I can see the love and the divine in you. And I can't fight you. I don't want to harm you. Why would I want to harm God? You're God, I'm God. Why would I want to harm you? You understand? This is what we get to when we get to the soul identity, is we're able to build trust, like authentic, tangible, meaningful, persistent connection, right? That is security. You being able to trust your neighbor being able to trust you, that is the beginning of security, right? And it's only from there that you begin to build economic trust, right? Economic security, land security, military security, technological security. I hope you're following me. Yeah, so I've talked about from the soul to the civilization, right? So this conversation we're having is about the civilizational design, right? It's not just about the self and the family and the community. This is a question of what kind of person do we need? What kind of person do you have to become? What kind of person do I have to become to be able to inhabit and maintain a liberated civilization? A civilization in which people don't feel like they have to steal from each other. They don't feel like they have to extract from each other. They don't feel like they have to harm each other. A civilization in which our fundamental truth, our fundamental identity is Ubuntu. We take care of each other. We preserve each other because we know that in your preservation is my preservation. Who do we have to become to embody that, to carry that into the future, and to maintain that for the next 100, 200, 500, 10,000 years? At least get my daughter and my grandchildren and all the future generations of my bloodline, at least be able to preserve them. Who do we have to be? What kind of people do we have to be? Right? And so you have to ask yourself, who is your soul? What do you see in your soul? What do you feel when you meditate and tap into that energy and that electricity of the divine power moving through you? We're going to do that meditation in a bit. So, one of my key things here is to integrate these conversations, right? I've talked about technology, spirituality, religions, like social justice, politics, like all of it being integrated into one. And you need the expertise from all these different fields, all these different spaces. And shout out to Black people because we know how to survive. Like, we've been doing this work forever, right? For forever. We're still here. They've been trying to destroy us for a very long time. Um, and there's already a lot of us who, across theology, across, science, across art, right? Like, politics, right? We've been finding ways to collaborate in order to sustain ourselves. And I'm just asking for a deeper integration, deeper collaboration, especially as it relates to power, security, protection, and not just survival, but thriving. Again, Black Sacred Futurity asks, how do we move into a liberated future with our souls intact, not the adapted identity, but the soul identity. So I'm seeking for, I'm inviting you into a deeper integration, no matter what field you're in, what background you're in. I want to hear what liberation means to you. I want to hear what you believe about how we can maintain liberated souls, liberated bodies, liberated beings into a liberated future. Asha. All right, where we at? All right, I think it's time for us to breathe. let's breathe. Let's do my favorite sound bath. All right. We took a few deep breaths in the beginning. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the subscriptions. Thank you for the shares. Thank you for all the different, thank you for comments. Thank you for all the different ways that you've been showing love. I really appreciate y'all because I tell you, I just come on here to offload what the divine has given me. And I just be grateful that somebody is here to receive it. I'm not just talking to myself in the camera, right? Okay. I'm going to turn the fan back on because got hot right quick. One more deep breath. I want you to feel the electricity in your body. Just pay attention. Pay attention to how energy is animating your body, is present in your body. Feel the breath moving in your nostrils, out through your lips. Feel the energy moving through your body. And just rest. Who are you? At your deepest self, who are you? Your core self, who are you? What images come up in answer to this question? What sensations come up in answer to this question? What memories come up? Who are you when you don't have to pretend? When do you feel the most free, the most relaxed, the most rested, the most safe, the most valuable? Who are you? Who is your core self? Who is your soul self? I want you to sit with this question as often as you can, as often as you can breathe into it, as you can imagine, as you can tap into the memory. Ask yourself that question. Who is my soul self? Who does my soul want me to be? Are you embodying that person right now? If you are, then you're free. But like you're probably in the 0.01%. But if you have any doubt about whether you are embodying the fullness of your soul self, spend time with that question. Tap into that embodiment. Recognize that is where God lives in you. And you deserve to be free. You deserve to be liberated. You deserve to be on a different timeline. You deserve to escape all this warfare. You deserve to escape all this evil. You deserve for your loved ones to be protected, to be exempted. You deserve to defeat the enemy. Asha. I'll just say a quick prayer that the divine, we're just calling you to cancel every plan of the enemy right now. We just diffuse their power right now. We dissolve them. We destroy their harm. We destroy their negative intention. We radiate the power of the divine within us. We radiate the power of your children. We radiate the power of light in those of us who love peace, who love rest, who love joy, who love harmony, who love ease, who love unity, who love oneness. We radiate our power now, Divine Father, Divine Mother, Infinite One. We thank you for your presence in us, with us, around us. We receive strengthening right now, Divine Infinity. We declare that the light overpowers the darkness right now, all throughout the world. May your light shine from your children. May the light overpower the darkness. In Yeshua's mighty name, in the name of the most benevolent ancestors, we pray. Listen, if you want to work together, if you want to collaborate, if you want to bring me to your school, your campus, if you want to bring a curated cultural experience, some of the curated art and film and work that we've done, get at me. Team at Nora Labs. I believe there's links in the description. We will talk very soon. I love y'all. Appreciate you for watching. Stay blessed, stay covered. Take it easy and dream and expect and believe and embody your divine soul, self, your infinite one. Asha.